If you're a chess player who's spent any time on the internet, you've probably come across the saying never play f6. But if you search a little bit deeper and try to think why you shouldn't play f6, it's a little bit more difficult to find information. Either you're just told that you're creating weaknesses, or you get a whole big chunk of information that doesn't make sense at all. In this video, I'm going to explain to you exactly why you shouldn't be playing f6 so that you can understand it a bit better, and I'll also be giving you an idea of how to punish your opponent if they do play f6 in the first couple of moves against you. Let's say you start off with the move e4, taking control of the center, and your opponent replies with f6. Let us look at the reasons why this is bad. Firstly, after pushing this pawn, you can see that now your king isn't protected by that pawn, and this diagonal to your uncastled king is open to attack. The second reason is if you just think ahead and wonder where your opponent's king is going to end up. After castling, they're going to end up on the g8 square. Once again, look at the spaces that have been made by pushing that pawn forward, and we can now see that this entire diagonal heading towards your opponent's castled king is now going to be weak. So when you've played the move pawn to f6, first of all, you've weakened the diagonal to your uncastled king, and secondly, you've weakened that diagonal to your castled king if it ends up on that side of the board. And as an additional factor, your opponent could just do something like put a bishop over here, and how is your king going to end up castling and getting to safety if the square that it needs to end up on is protected and cannot be defended because you cannot move pawns backwards? So how can we punish our opponents very quickly if they do make some of these mistakes? The first way things can go really wrong for your opponent, though I assume most people wouldn't end up doing this, but it's good just to keep in mind because it is a pattern that might appear somewhere in your game. So if you start off with something like e4, your opponent plays f6, you can play then d4, just pawn to the center, and if your opponent is just going completely crazy trying to do connect 4 with their pawns and pushes their pawn to g5, we have the move queen to h5. Remember, the weakness that was created by pushing f6 was this diagonal to the king was now very weak. We're taking advantage of that weakness, and your opponent can't put any pieces on these squares to block the check, the king doesn't have any space to move to, and you've just got to win in 3 moves. Something that's a little bit more common at a beginner level is if you go e4, your opponent plays e5, they know that they need to take control of the center in the opening, you bring out your knight to f3, you're attacking their pawn, you're developing a piece, and they notice that their pawn is attacked and they decide to defend it with f6. It looks like a fairly normal move. You're busy defending the pawn, but the problem is they've played f6 and they have weakened this diagonal. What we're able to do is go knight takes e5, which looks absolutely insane because your opponent can just capture back your knight with their pawn. But the problem is, once again, this diagonal, so we go queen to h5 check. We're attacking the king. You may not think this is so much of a problem, but look at this. Pawn to g6 to block the check. Queen swings across and we are busy attacking the king and we are attacking the rook at the same time, and no matter how they block the check, we're just going to munch the free rook. They have a check after that, but we can just hide in the corner and now we're just an entire rook up after 7 moves. How about if they don't block the check? Let's say they move their king instead. Notice they don't have any other pieces to put on these squares. Let's say they move their king to the only safe square. Then we can just bring across our queen to e5, we take the pawn, we've now got 2 pawns for the knight that we gave up. They have a very unsafe king, and it has to keep on running. We can get another piece into the attack, and in a lot of cases your opponent will just go something like this, and you can go check, king has to go across, and then we just bring this pawn out, which looks as though we're ignoring everything, but actually we're busy attacking the king. It's check, the king is out of squares to move to, and if your opponent blocks with their queen, you take with your queen and you get mate in 1. If they instead block with their pawn, you have a really good attack going with h4, and checkmate should follow fairly soon after that. All of this happens. It seems as though your opponent just got really unlucky, but it all comes back to that move f6, after which we were able to take with the knight. And if they don't take us back, let's say they bring a piece out, we just have to remember to bring our knight back to safety. That's just a quick example of some of the things that can go wrong if you play f6 or f5, or if as white you play f3 and f4, and also how to punish your opponent if they haven't followed these rules and they end up playing one of those moves. Make sure that if you're a little bit more advanced and you want to try play f6 or f4 later on in the game or at the start of the game, then just make sure that those diagonals are covered and they're not going to cause you any problems. If you did find this video helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel to see more content like this, and if you have any specific topics that you'd like covered in future videos, let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Bye.